Isn't it funny how one week you could be on top of the world, and then next thing you know, you can look up in a span of 15 days and all of a sudden find yourself out of that college football playoff conversation. Even in this final month of the season, things can come at you fast. Things can go quickly in this fast paced game of college football. And we are on the home stretch of the college football regular season. Welcome to the Any Given Saturday podcast, because anything can happen on any given Saturday. All those upsets that you see around the country, regardless of division level, should be a perfect indicator of that. We are recording this on a crisp Friday morning. Beautiful Friday fall day here in Dayton, Ohio. And we are out here. We got a good show for you guys here tonight on the podcast. We are going to jump in. First and foremost, we're actually going to have two podcasts this week, a miracle in itself, and you absolutely love to see it. But then likewise, we also have the opportunity, the sheer opportunity itself. Week might be coming in here, and we're going to be talking about key week 11 matchups around the country here tonight, because, ladies and gentlemen, we have four top 25 matchups that are going to be coming your way over the course of this upcoming weekend. And not to mention, I'll have a couple of best bets to try to help you guys win some money this upcoming weekend. Maybe something that does involve tonight. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive into it. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. And if you do, make sure you go ahead, smack that like button, hit that subscribe button if you do happen to be brand new, because what that does for me, when you do that for me, man, what you do is that, one, you tell me that you like this type of content, of college football coverage, trying to look at things from a 50,000 foot perspective. So liking the video not only lets me know that you enjoy it, but also it helps get this video out to more college football fans like yourself. And you see the size of our channel as well. It's a very small channel. I get that. I understand that. But what you can do is, choosing to subscribe to this channel, you can be an A1 since day one, baby. Who doesn't have the opportunity to do that every once in a while, to be a part of something new? And you could do that by just simply hitting that subscribe button, then hitting that like button. Well, that only takes a few seconds. So that being said, we are jam-packed with previews of key matchups around the country. Matter of fact, we have four top 25 matchups embroiled around the country. Games that have college football playoff implications, games that potentially have conference implications as well. It's getting very real. We're getting into that final stretch of the season. We talked about in the previous podcast that idea of either, as in the world of Zombieland would always say, it's time to nut up or shut up. For many teams, it's certainly that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and get off this soapbox in terms of an intro. We got a lot of good action coming for you here today. We got four top 25 games, and the eyes of the nation get started on a noon on Saturday. We get things started going out to University Park, Pennsylvania. Some people like to call this place Happy Valley. We got number 10 Penn State hosting the number 3 ranked, undefeated Michigan Wolverines. This is going to be the Fox noon kickoff. Fox Sports, their version of College Game Day, is going to be here at Beaver Stadium. And I'm going to tell you this, Penn State is one of the most challenging environments in college football to try and play in. And Michigan has to go into their house. And for Michigan, we figured that they were going to be 9-0 at this point in the year. We have not seen Michigan play a opponent that's ranked in the top 25 at any point in this season. We talked about that strength of schedule. We know that Michigan's schedule was in that bottom 25, bottom 30 teams in the country. So we knew that there was a good chance, unless there was some serious chaos, that we were not going to see Michigan drop a game. And that has happened for the Michigan Wolverines so far this year. Matter of fact, they have not been embroiled in a one-possession game going into the fourth quarter all season long. So we've seen Michigan, yes, they've had a very weak strength of schedule, but with that schedule, do what they're supposed to do. And what they've done with that schedule thus far is they have simply went ahead and took care of business in terms of, okay, this is our schedule. Let's go ahead and take care of the teams on paper. And they've done that so far. But for Michigan, we know 2 of those last 3 games are entitled to. The season gets very real for the Michigan Wolverines very quickly. As Drake would always say, you want to talk about going 0 to 100 real quick? For Michigan, it does go from 0 to 100 real quick. And like we talked about in this intro, things can come at you very fast. And that's why coaches are always paranoid no matter what time of the season it is. Think of what happened to Oklahoma, for example. Just a few weeks ago, Oklahoma was undefeated. They controlled their own destiny to get to the college football playoff, to get to the Big 12 championship. And listen, maybe Oklahoma did have those expectations, at least reasonable expectations to be back in that spot, but only took 2 games. Bedlam game and the game against Kansas, and now they're out of it, and now they need some help to get into the Big 12. For Michigan, it's the same thing. And with this schedule in mind, it's very important for them to win out because of what those tiebreakers is. Do you understand what could happen? Let's say Penn State finds a way to beat Michigan, and we'll talk about how I think what's going to be keys of this game and who I think is ultimately going to win the game ultimately moving forward. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I just wanted to set the foundation of what could happen, what kind of scenario we could be dealing with. So let's say Penn State beats Michigan. The Nittany Lions already lost to Ohio State, and then a few weeks from now, we see Ohio State lose in Ann Arbor to this Michigan squad. We could be dealing with a freeway tie for the Big Ten title. And there are 8 separate tiebreakers that are in place in the event that 3 teams are tied. But it goes right back to number 5 if that scenario takes place. Because in that scenario, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan, they would have not lost any Big Ten games outside of that cohort. So it goes to 5. And now all of a sudden, the West Division indirectly chooses who goes to the Big Ten championship over in the East Division. Because that 5th tiebreaker is if the records of 3 or more teams are tied, they will be compared on the best cumulative conference winning percentage of non-divisional opponents. And going back to that strength of schedule, let's say Penn State beats Michigan. All of a sudden, 1, Michigan needs to beat Ohio State, but then 2, they will need Penn State to drop another game. And for the Nittany Lions, they already played Ohio State. What they have after this, after this game for Penn State, they got Rutgers at home, and then they have Michigan State on the road. Now, Rutgers, I think, is a solid football team. That game was actually closer than what the scoreboard indicated when they took on Ohio State, when they hosted Ohio State in their building. So Rutgers is certainly a solid football team, one that's already bowl eligible. Greg Schiano's doing a great job there. Certainly not a game that you can automatically write in as a W. You actually have to show up and play that particular game. Michigan State is a different story, so we won't crap on Michigan State so too much. But that's what's at stake right now. Not only that, for the conference championships, and Michigan with that lower strength of schedule than a Penn State and Ohio State, they don't want to be in that 3-team scenario. And then vice versa, going up to a higher level in the college football playoff. Can you imagine if there was a freeway tie? You have 3 11-1 teams in the Big Ten Conference. What does the college football playoff committee do with that? That's a tough question. That is a very difficult answer to arrive to. And if that scenario happens, I would not want to be in that college football playoff committee room. I do not want to wish down on anybody, because no matter what you decide to move forward with in terms of who makes that 4-team playoff, in that scenario, there would be at least one team from the Big Ten that would be in, I would imagine. But then does it open up the door possibly for a second Big Ten team to get in? Who knows? I'm just saying, a lot at stake in this game. So that being said, laying that foundation, what are the keys to this particular game between the Michigan Wolverines and the Nittany Lions of Penn State? And I mean, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Not only does Michigan have that to worry about, not only do they have these two of their hardest games of the season happening in the next 3 weeks, and Maryland is no pushover either. They're right in between. Could be a letdown game, by the way. We might talk about that next week. How does Michigan handle those distractions? It's been nonstop talk about what the NCAA could possibly do, what the Big Ten Conference could possibly do. Now, Jim Harbaugh was already suspended for 3 games this year. But here's the thing about that. Jim Harbaugh was suspended for a separate thing. It was a recruiting violation involving, giving a recruit a burger, and now all of a sudden you see all these sign stealing allegations, and the NCAA is going to give they're going to do their thorough job doing their investigation. They say they're going to expedite the process, but me personally, I don't think that we're going to have a decision this year. I think that if it's true that this sign stealing did happen and it happened in an illegal way, Michigan should be held accountable. But what does that look like? The Big Ten, on a sportsmanship policy, what they can do is that they could suspend Jim Harbaugh for a couple of games. And for now, Jim Harbaugh is coaching in this Penn State game. But a lot of things can change in the span of 24 hours. We have seen a lot go out in different ways. I'm not going to dive into the specifics of that, but what I will say is that Michigan is dealing with a lot. And how does Michigan's, as a program, handle that? Not the team. I'm talking about the program, the structure as a whole. How do they keep themselves focused on the task at hand? And the task at hand is going into Beaver Stadium and beating this really good Penn State football team. It could be channeled in a positive way. It could be channeled in a negative way. It could be channeled in multiple directions. It just depends on the makeup of the guys that are in your team, in your locker room. It depends on how those alphas handle that situation. The players, if the right players are leading this team, then, hey, maybe Michigan could channel it in a positive way and take it personally. And we get a show that Penn State is truly not rangered for. But if not, then this season could spiral out of control quickly, and it could be an Oklahoma situation where you're undefeated and you control your own destiny, but then you're looking up 15 days later, all of a sudden, oh, we're out of the playoff hunt. It can happen just like that. And that's why it's so hard to get into the college football playoff, because it's really a survive and advance. You're talking about kids that are 18 to 22 years old, mostly. There's some outliers, but the point is this. It's hard for 18 to 22-year-olds to be consistent all the time, especially with all those distractions that are happening. Now, going into the actual game at hand, it's going to comes down to how there's going to be a key matchup that's going to be happening for sure. We got Penn State's rush defense going up against the vaunted running game of Michigan's offense. We know that Michigan has that duo of Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum, and those two went off last year when these two teams got together over in Ann Arbor. When these two teams got together, the difference in that game was that running back duo. They ended up piling up over 400 yards of rushing. That's 4 football fields, ladies and gentlemen. Also ended up with 4 touchdowns. That was the difference. Penn State could not stop the run, but the rushing defense for Penn State is a little bit better. than what we saw from them in the previous season. Because the reason is this: Penn State has one of the best rushing defenses in the entire country. They're allowing just over 60 yards a game. That is better than what they were last year. This is one of the elite rushing defenses in the entire country. Ohio State was having a hard time running the ball at them. Their defense was just playing at a higher level. That's why they won, not just because of being able to solve Penn State's defense on a consistent basis. So how is the front seven for Penn State? How are they able to hold up, right, in that regard? Because if Michigan can reestablish that running game like they did last year, it's going to be a world of trouble, because what we have also seen over the course of this year as well is that we have seen J.J. McCarthy, while he was good last year, I would say good to above average, depending on what your opinion is. We've seen J.J. McCarthy, for the most part, take that next step. He has more yards per attempt than last year. He has a significantly higher completion percentage than last year. Last year, he was only completing 65% of his passes. He's already completed almost 76% of passes at the Division I college level. His touchdown interception ratio is about the same, but if you take away that Bowling Green game, he actually hasn't thrown a single interception all year long. Those 3 interceptions that he's thrown this season, it all happened in the Bowling Green game. And that happened in what, September? Early September? So it's been almost a couple of months since the last time J.J. McCarthy has actually turned the football over. How does J.J. McCarthy, can he establish a rhythm? If in the event that, hey, our run game isn't really getting going, can J.J. McCarthy come out and win this game? And it could ignite a Heisman Trophy campaign. He's already in the mix. He's considered one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And because of that, by default, because of how we prioritize quarterbacks over every other position in college football when it comes to the Heisman Trophy, automatically J.J. McCarthy is in that Heisman Trophy conversation. So we'll see what happens there. Can J.J. McCarthy have that ability to come out, win a very tough game happening on the road? That's what I'm really curious about here. Now, James Franklin, one more thing that I want to note about James Franklin before I get into my prediction. I see talk that James Franklin is overrated, but I don't think there's a lot of people out there, when they talk about James Franklin, they don't really understand what being overrated means, right? So here's the thing with being overrated. That would imply that he was perceived at a higher level than what he actually is. And I think a lot of people would agree that James Franklin is considered a third best coach in the Big Ten, in the Big Ten East. No one is really putting him above Ryan Day. No one is really putting him above Jim Harbaugh, whether you love him or hate him. So he might be properly rated, but the question is, does Penn State deserve better? Now, that's a conversation that could be had. Michigan, this is one of Jim Harbaugh's best teams that he's had, and this might be his last best shot to win a national championship. Next year, Michigan schedule is going to be a lot more difficult. They're going to lose a good chunk of core guys, likely to the NFL, as well as definitely to graduation. Penn State, James Franklin might have one of his best teams as well. So we could be in for an epic title clash on the way here coming up. What I think is going to happen in this game. So we'll take a look at what Vegas says. And this is as of last night. I woke up recently this morning. I'm recording this about 8:30 in the morning. I woke up about half an hour ago, to be honest with you guys. So I haven't checked the betting lines this morning. But last night, as of Thursday night, Michigan was favored by 4.5 points. Now, you see the model here. The model thinks the wrong team is actually favored. The model actually believes that Penn State is actually should be favored by that 4.5, not the Wolverines of Michigan. So what do we think is going to happen in this game? At the end of the day, we've seen teams deal with distractions. Hell, we saw Georgia deal with distractions in the offseason with their with the car racing and their alleged issues with their culture being put into question. We've seen those things happen, but this is different. This is constant. Everyone and their mama is talking about what's going to happen to this Michigan team. And I think no matter how strong and how structured your program is, from the top to bottom, an organization can only handle so much. There has to eventually be a breaking point. And now that we're going to see Michigan play a college football playoff caliber team, I mean, Penn State is still in the running, of course. I think that breaking point might actually be today, especially with an amped up Beaver Stadium that is going to be loud. It's going to be proud for its Nittany Lions. So we're going to have Penn State not just cover here today. We are actually going to have Penn State winning this game outright and handing the Michigan Wolverines their very first loss of the entire season. But you know what? That's why the game is played on Saturday. I think this is going to be one of the more intriguing games of Saturday. And it's going to be a great appetizer for what's going to be coming on later on in the afternoon into the evening tomorrow night. But we talked about appetizers, though. But what about what's happening in the next, tranche, I would say, of games that are coming up? We still have 3 more top 25 games to get into here tonight. Now, what if I told you that the SEC East is actually not as locked down as you think it is? Now, I'm going to show you guys real quick the SEC standings. East Division, West Division. And at first glance, it seems that Georgia does indeed have it on lock. They got a 2-game lead over Missouri, who they actually just beat in the previous weekend. However, with 2 conference games left, not everything, at least not completely, is set in stone. Well, that is because we actually have a couple games in the SEC East that, depending on how things end up shaking out in the SEC East over the course of this weekend, in a couple of games in particular, all of a sudden we might have an SEC East championship on the horizon. Let's go and start with the game that is going to be happening a little bit earlier in today. We have number 13 Tennessee. We're going to end up going on the road and taking on the number 14 ranked Missouri Tigers. Now, Missouri has just lost their 2nd game of the season. So for all intents and purposes, they are out of the college football playoff race, and they are now out of going to Atlanta. There's no foreseeable path for, say, Missouri to surpass Georgia, because Georgia does have the tiebreaker on Missouri. But they can still put themselves in a position to go to a New Year's Six Bowl. So a lot of what Missouri wanted to accomplish this upcoming season is still in the works. It can still happen. However, for Tennessee, even though they are not really in a position to go to the college football playoff either, that loss to Florida in September is really coming back to haunt them right now. All of a sudden, this Tennessee team, if the cards fall right, they can put themselves in a position to compete for the opportunity to go to Atlanta this upcoming week. Let me explain. So Tennessee right now, like you saw on the screen earlier, they are a couple games back from Georgia. However, Georgia, on the other hand, has has to go play Ole Miss at home. Ole Miss is a really good team. That's not a scratch and dub by any means. We'll talk about that game more later. So that being considered, Tennessee could put themselves in a spot to where all of a sudden their chance to go to Atlanta lays right in front of them and they can control their own destiny. But they got to win this game and they got to be able to make sure that, hey, they got to play their cards right, so to speak. So that being said, huge game coming in your direction. And it's going to be a fun one. I am going to be extremely excited about that particular game. So that being said, what should we watch out for in this particular matchup? Now, the last time these two teams happened to go ahead and, well, play each other, well, I guess it would be last year. I don't know where I was going with that. But that being said, Missouri might have their best defense in years. They're going to be taking on a Tennessee team where, you think of Tennessee, you think of, okay, they like to throw the ball around and like to have these all like really explosive plays. I mean, this is not that same Tennessee team. We talked about it a couple of times this year already, but Tennessee is just not like that. They love to run the ball, but Missouri is built to stop the run. Missouri, they're in the top 25 nationally in terms of defending the run. And then in addition to that, they are 5th in the SEC right now. So Missouri is pretty battle tested in terms of, okay, we can stop them in the run. And it begs the question, can this Tennessee passing game be a factor? Can that be an actual possibility? Because Joe Milton III, he's had his flashes. And if you look at his stats, he's not, it's not like he's not an incompetent quarterback. 15 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, has thrown for over 2,000 yards with a 65% completion percentage. It's truly, he's not bad by any means. But can Joe Milton come out and win the game? Now that is the real question that is at hand. Can Joe Milton provide himself with the ability, if he needs to make enough plays and win the game? Because on the other side, Brady Cook, well, just like his last name, he was cooking. In the one positive that last time these two teams met, Tennessee did win in Knoxville, but Brady Cook played pretty well in that game. 221, 3 touchdowns, also ran for over 100 yards. And he's taken that step up this year. Brady Cook has thrown for close to 2,500 yards already, 16 touchdown passes, and only 5 interceptions on the year. So he's taken really that step up when he really has needed to. So that being said, how do they counteract that? Because I think it's going to be more important than anything. And Tennessee has been pretty good at this over the course of the season, is starting quickly. And in the first quarter, Tennessee has done that so far this year. 89-29, they have outscored their opponents in the first quarter of the season. And they have also scored at least 1 touchdown in the first quarter of games in 31 of 35 games that Coach Heupel has been on the sideline for this Tennessee Volunteers squad. They've only been shut out once this season. Granted, it was a complete surprise when they only won by 17 against an FCS team. So against FBS opponents, they have always managed to score in the first quarter. And given how this Tennessee team is built, I think it's really important for them to start fast because of how they kind of not rely on the running game, but they certainly have leaned on that running game a little bit more than what they've had done in previous seasons. So, that being said, let's say Missouri throws those first punches, and all of a sudden Joe Milton III has to throw the ball a little bit more. Well, that's not how they want to play their games this season, because Joe Milton has the arm, but that neck up mentality. Not necessarily sure if he really has that. At least not the same level that Hendon Hooker had when he was playing at Missouri last year. But likewise, it's not even that like Missouri is going to have one of those like they're not going to be able to walk over Tennessee. Obviously, Tennessee, they do have one of the best pass defenses in the country, or not one of the best pass defense. They've been okay, but they just lost their corner Kamal Hayden in that loss to Alabama a couple of weeks ago. How do they replace that so that Brady Cook doesn't cook on them? So I'm looking at this game, and I think there's a lot that could go into it. Right now, the line as of last night is Tennessee minus 1.5. And the model has Tennessee minus 9.5. So the model gives a lot more respect to Tennessee than what Vegas is giving Tennessee right now. But I'm thinking about, okay, Missouri can really stop the run, and that is Tennessee's main strength. Missouri's biggest strength, however, on offense is passing the ball. And they're also going to be the team that is going to not a vulnerable, I would say, pass defense. Their pass defense is fine. If I could find where Tennessee lands in terms of passing yards a game, I just saw it. Oh, where did they go? They're 44th, so they're not bad. They're not elite though. They're not at the quite that same level that maybe Missouri is when it comes to stopping the run. So when I woke up this morning, I actually did thought that, hey, I think Tennessee is going to win this game. But now I'm looking at, these key factors with Brady Cook and this passing attack and what it's been able to do. And not to mention they're going to be at home as well. I'm actually going to disagree with the model. The model believes that Tennessee is going to win and cover. And not only do I not believe that Tennessee is going to cover, so 1.5, I think Missouri is going to win this game. I think Missouri is going to come out and prove some doubters wrong, and maybe ends the hope of Tennessee going to Atlanta, finally shutting that door. I think Missouri ends up winning this game. I think it's going to be a close one, though. A game that is certainly going to be intriguing for sure. But let's say that I'm wrong, though. And let's say that Tennessee ends up winning that game against Missouri. All of a sudden, there's going to be a lot more eyes on this 7 o'clock game on ESPN. Number 9 Ole Miss going on the road to Athens, Georgia. Now, Sanford Stadium in Athens, Georgia has not seen a lot of high marquee home games in like the past few years. But all of a sudden, you get an Ole Miss team, top 10 in the country, rolling into town with a chance to possibly clinch the SEC East tomorrow night. Now, let's say Tennessee does end up winning. Georgia still needs to come out and handle their business. They still have a chance to handle and win the SEC East. But they got to take on a really good Ole Miss squad. Now, Ole Miss, they're going to need a little bit of help to get to Atlanta. They need Alabama to somehow lose its next couple of SEC games. Alabama has Kentucky, and then they have Auburn. Not looking good on that particular front. So, that being said, Ole Miss will need a little bit of help to get to Atlanta. But the very least that they can do is maybe they can play a little bit of spoiler on Georgia's end, maybe force Georgia into an SEC East championship type of scenario, whereas Ole Miss, let's say Ole Miss gets past this Georgia team. The rest of the schedule, their other 2 games, very winnable. They'll have UL Monroe, and UL Monroe, one of the worst teams in the Sun Belt, so we're going to go ahead and mark that as a dub. And then they'll have Mississippi State on the road for the Egg Bowl. And Mississippi State has struggled immensely in SEC play. They're only 1-5 in the SEC. So, well, for all intents and purposes, we'll mark that as a win as well. So, Ole Miss is staring at a 10-win season regardless. A win to Georgia, though, is going to make it a really interesting conversation for the College Football Playoff Committee in terms of what happens to Ole Miss in the eyes of the committee. What if Ole Miss wins out? You'll likely get an 11-1 team, but a team that is not going to go to Atlanta and compete for a conference championship because they won't be even able to win their division. So Ole Miss would suddenly be a little bit more taken seriously in that conversation because of that. So a lot on the line here between these two games in particular. So how does it happen? Now it's a double-digit favorite. So how does this game go down? What are the big keys of this game? Because Georgia has historically had Ole Miss's number. Georgia's won 10 of its last 11 games in that series. However, Ole Miss did end up winning the last meeting that they had between these two squads. Ole Miss beat Georgia 45-14 in Oxford. That was all the way back in 2016. These two teams, even though they're in the same conference, they actually haven't played each other in a while. So, laying down the foundation on what could go down. What are the real big keys of this game? So, Ole Miss, we know that they're extremely explosive on offense, especially on the ground. It's about stopping the run, slowing anything that you can do to stop and slow down the run. That's got to be how you come out and slow down that Ole Miss attack. And that's what Alabama did. That's how Alabama was able to eventually win 24-10. They were able to neutralize that running game. Now, Georgia, even with all the talent that they've lost over the last couple of years, they're still pretty solid at stopping that run game. They are tied for second in the SEC in run defense, only allowing 100 yards per game. Their worst game in the year was actually a surprisingly porous in that 30-21 win against Missouri when Cody Strader, one of the running backs for the Missouri Tigers, ends up going for 112 for 22 carries and ended up finding the end zone too. Brady Cook also found over 40 yards on the ground. So maybe Ole Miss could look at what Missouri did in the running game in order to maybe find ways to create big plays on the ground. The big difference between what Missouri did last week and how Ole Miss is going to be able to pull this off is that Ole Miss does have to be effective in the red zone. Missouri was able to get into the red zone on multiple occasions in their matchup against Georgia last weekend. The problem is, Missouri, when they got into the red zone, most of the time they were settling for field goals, whereas Georgia, when they got into the red zone most of the time, they ended up getting touchdowns. They were getting 6 points from the offense instead of just 3 points from their offense. And that was really the difference in the game. It's just the red zone efficiency between those two teams. Georgia is not going to be the type of team that is going to go out and beat itself. You will have to go out and beat this Georgia team. That's why Georgia currently has the longest win streak in the NCAA right now. That's why they also haven't lost since 2020, and that was that COVID year. They will not let you beat themselves. You got to go out and beat Georgia. So for Ole Miss to do that, and in order to accomplish that, they got to be effective in terms of that red zone efficiency. And Ole Miss does have the pieces necessary to get that ability to create rushing yards on the ground. Jackson Dart is a very good dual threat quarterback. We know what he can do with his arm. He's got a very good arm, 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. His QBR is good for top 15 in the NCAA at the FBS level. So Jackson Dart is a very good quarterback passing the ball. But what Jackson Dart has also been able to accomplish as well, he knows how to, he just knows how, he has a nose for the end zone. He has 330 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns on the ground. He's also paired with Quinshawn Judkins, who is 5th in the SEC with 88 rushing yards a game. That's an SEC play. So hypothetically, Ole Miss does have the pieces in order to get an advantage over that Georgia rushing game. The question is, can they execute at a high enough level to actually pull it off? Now, Georgia is not going to be 100% on the defensive side of the ball. They are going to be missing one of their key linebackers and junior linebacker, Jamin Desmond Johnson. He ended up fracturing his left forearm in that game against Missouri. This is a guy that not only is a key starter for this Georgia defense, this is an All-American that we're talking about. He was, wearing a cast and a sling. So there is a real chance that they do not have him. Now, Coach Kirby Smart has mentioned that they're going to look for innovative plays to allow him to keep playing. But is that locked in? I mean, it shouldn't be locked in for an injury like that. So in the event that that All-American linebacker is not going to be able to play, you got some young talent behind him. Sophomores, Jalen Locker, Xavier Story Jr., freshman CJ Allen. It could be a linebacker by committee where you see a rotation of inside linebackers because, not neither of those guys, none of the guys that I mentioned could do everything that Johnson could do, but each person could do pieces of what he was able to bring. And it's going to create a situation where that coaching staff is going to find when to play these guys at the right time. And while they're going to be very good players, maybe potential NFL talents in a way that they're, high 4 stars and 5 stars, like many of the players that Georgia ends up bringing in, they're still inexperienced. They haven't seen a lot of high-level football that the talent in front of them has seen. So it's just interesting to watch to see if Johnson will be a good to go or if he would have to be sidelined because of that injury. And lastly, we have to see, can the 12th man come into effect? Now, this game is in Athens, Georgia, and that really helps Georgia's favor because they do have one of the biggest winning streaks at home as well. They are currently sitting on a 24-game winning streak at home, and that's dating back to the Kentucky game. So it's actually at 26 games, if I'm reading that correctly. So Georgia has a 26-game winning streak at home, and they also have a 12-game winning streak against teams specifically that come into Sanford Stadium and come into that game ranked in the top 25. So can the 12th man show up and maybe rattle this Ole Miss offense, maybe create an offsides or a false start? If the 12th man can help contribute in creating a first down or two, that could really help shift the momentum of the game, because Sanford Stadium gives its reputation of kind of being a little bit sleepy, but they haven't had the caliber of opponents at the same time that Georgia has been able to bring in this season through SEC action. We saw what could happen with Kentucky, and now we have Ole Miss. First time in a while that they're bringing in a top 10 team into their stadium. So you absolutely love to see that. So we'll check what the line thinks. We'll see what the line covers. Georgia right now is a 10.5-point favorite according to Vegas. And the model, the Any Given Saturday power rating model, is about dead on. It gives Georgia a little bit more credit. It's at 11.5. Ole Miss is a little bit more healthy than they were in that Alabama game. I will say that first and foremost. Georgia is still going to be without Brock Bowers. On top of that, too, we haven't even talked about the Georgia offense. Here's the thing. I think this is going to be one of those games where I think it's going to be a one possession game. I think this game is truly going to be close. However, here's what I think is going to happen, though. I don't think Georgia is going to cover this 10.5-point spread. I truly don't believe that. I think Ole Miss is too talented offensively to kind of be blown out of the water. However, I do think the 12th man really does help in this regard. So we're going to take Georgia to win. We're going to take Georgia to win outright. We're not going to take Georgia to cover that 10.5-point spread. We're going to give Ole Miss the benefit of doubt here. We're going to disagree with the model here yet again. We'll give Ole Miss the 10.5, but we don't see them winning this game now. I just don't see that happening. I think Georgia wins, and because of this win, they will be able to lock in their tickets to go to the SEC championship down in Atlanta. And finally, we got one more game that I want to go ahead and cover here today. I need to get some more water for myself. I'm starting to run out of water. These are trying times in the kingdom, truly. One more top 25 game is actually happening all the way out in the West Coast. We got number 18 Utah. Number 18 Utah is going on the road and taking on this Washington Huskies squad. So here's the thing with Washington. I think that Washington can actually, go ahead, and if they win this game, they would essentially punch their ticket to, I believe it's Vegas, that they're having the Pac-12 championship this year. So Washington winning this game, they're going to be able to go ahead and they're going to be able to at least punch their ticket to Vegas at the end of the regular season if they win this game. Because at that point, Washington is going to be 7-0 in conference action if they were able to handle their business in this particular game against Utah. And then we'll have to see how the rest of the Pac-12 shakes out. Now, for Utah, again, not in that college football playoff picture in terms of being one of the top 4 teams at the end of the season. But Utah is the 2-time defending champions of the Pac-12 conference. They have ruined seasons for teams in the past. And for the Utes, going on the road to Seattle, this is going to be one of those must-win games if they want to keep their hopes of going to Vegas ultimately alive. They'll still need a little bit of help from Oregon in order to make that happen, but they're, by all intents and purposes, they're certainly not done yet. So that kind of lays the groundwork. Washington, of course, controls their own destiny. They have an inside track because if Washington wins out, they go 12-0, they win in the Pac-12 championship, they win out, they completely control their own destiny, they'll be one of those top 4 teams in the nation when the dust settles. I think they could even, at this point, Washington could lose a game and still possibly make it to the Pac-12, make it into the college football playoff, because they have played they actually played quite a good number of top 25 opponents. You know, they played Oregon. We've seen them play against Oregon. We saw them play against USC. USC is a good team as well. Not a great team that maybe we anticipated them being, but they're a good team nonetheless. They also have a ranked win over Arizona, if you want to count that as well. Arizona has really turned into a much more quality win for the Huskies. They're almost through their gauntlet. They got Fisk, they got Oregon State, and then they have Washington State. So we got that foundation. Utah must win if they want to have any chance of making it not just, 3 straight Pac-12 championships. Washington just trying to remain undefeated, trying to, continue their focus. Now, Washington has a similar caliber of offense that Oregon has. And here's why I mentioned that specifically. Utah, when they played against Oregon early in the year, when they took on that Oregon team a couple of weeks ago, they were blew out of the water. It was 35-6. It was an ugly game. It was a game that I had on like my main TV screen on Saturday. It got so bad that we actually, my wife wanted me to flip it to another game. She was begging me to stop the madness and let it be. Let the ride to the sunset, so to speak. So for Utah to possibly pull this upset off, Washington needs to do two things. They need to set a tone early because Utah, without Cam Rising, they are just not a team that's built to play from behind. And when Oregon started as fast as they did in that first half of that game, in Utah, by the way, it was pretty much game, set, max. Because here's how this Utah offense is built without Cam Rising. They mainly want to run the football. That's what they want to do. Now, they can sprinkle in passes here and there, work in and integrate some play action, but when they have to be forced to become one-dimensional and have to drop back 30, 40 plus times in a game, Utah is just not built that way. They just don't have the perimeter talent on the outside, and they don't have the caliber of quarterback required to kind of, once they get into a shootout type of game, they just don't have the weaponry to try to stay close. So to like get it close or like try to like storm back. So Utah, I'm really curious. First quarter and a half in this game, it's going to be really important for them to either keep it close or even build a lead early in the game in order to get those guys settled in and have them in their respective comfort zone. Because defensively, defense is as reliable as it comes. So it's going to be one of those games where maybe the defense might have to win the turnover battle. I think this might be a type of game where if Utah wants to pull this upset off, they actually need to win the turnover battle. It's going to be one of those games. And they were able to do that last week when they took on Arizona State. Arizona State thought maybe could be turning corner and, showing some signs of progression. Quickly went down to earth, beat them 55-3. So offense has to be consistent and has to get some quality possessions in that first quarter, first half of the second quarter type of game. Utah will need to be able to win the turnover battle. I think it's going to be that kind of thing. I don't think this is kind of a game where I think Utah could win straight up. I think they're going to have to rely on that defense, win the turnover battle, and use their defense to try to create some points. Why and how are they going to do that? They're going to have to be able to bother Michael Penix Jr. Because trust me, the eyes of the Heisman voters everywhere, they are going to be watching real close to what Michael Penix Jr. does in this game, because he has been electric this year. 3,200 passing yards, 26 touchdowns. He is top 5 in QBR to go with that as well. And not to mention, he does have a rushing touchdown too, which is, that's pretty cool to see as well. Can Utah slow down Michael Penix Jr.? And I mean slow down. You're not going to bottling up. I don't think this is a case where you shut down Michael Penix Jr. I don't think it's going to be that kind of game. But you could slow him down, though. You can create pressure. You could create defensive looks that confuse the young quarterback. And if you do that, you certainly give yourself a shot. But what does Vegas think? What does the model think? Vegas believes that Washington should be favored by 9.5 points. Washington, for the model, on the other hand, I think it's only going to be a field goal game. So the model thinks Utah will cover, but not necessarily win. And I think this might be the first time. No, it's not the first time I'm going to agree with the model, but once again, I'll agree with the model in this one. We didn't agree with the model the first couple of times. I'm going to go ahead and side with the model here. I do think that this becomes a game that Utah wants to play and kind of make it their style of football, kind of slow things down a little bit, at least keep the Washington offense off the field where anything could happen and the upset does become possible. However, I don't think Utah has the offensive weaponry to win it this year. So that we're going to pick Utah to cover. We will do that. We're going to allow Utah to cover. We're going to take the 9.5 on Utah. But I still think that Washington will end up winning this game, though. I think they'll get to 10-0. And with that win, they'll essentially be able to clinch their way into the Pac-12 championship later on in the fall. But that's why we play the game. We're going to see what happens. I truly would not be shocked if Utah finds a way to win this game. However, more likely than not, I do think Washington ends up winning it. But I do believe that it's going to be within one possession. I don't see this being a blowout like it was when Utah played Oregon. I think they learned how to make adjustment for things and maybe make Michael Penix not necessarily shut him down, but at least make him uncomfortable. So that does end up covering the top 25 matchups that I wanted to cover this week. Let's go ahead and jump into our best bets now. So far this year, we're so far in this particular week, I should say, we're 1 for 2 in our best bets. We started off, we ended up picking Miami minus 17.5. And we nailed it. We ended up getting that right on the 17.5. Louisville, on the other hand, Louisville was actually in a fight for their lives last night. I actually thought Louisville was going to cover this 20.5, and it looks like they were in the first half. But then Virginia stormed back, and all of a sudden, Virginia is in a position to win. Louisville does find a way to win, but they do not cover that 20.5. So we're 1 for 2 so far this week. So how do we finish strong, so to speak, and get to at least like a 3 for 4, which would be a good week for us? We're going to start with later on tonight. Friday night football. SMU is going to be playing North Texas. We're going to go with SMU minus 16.5. I think this team is actually, like, if you want to favor teams on a neutral side field, I think from that perspective, I think SMU is the best group of 5 team in the country. From that perspective, I think they're better than Tulane. I think they're better than a James Madison or a Liberty. Now, do I think SMU should be ranked over those 3 teams I just mentioned? No. But on a neutral side field, I would not be shocked to see SMU favored. So I say all that to say SMU is a fabulous football team. They are ready to make the transition to the Power 5. They will be making that transition to the Power 5. We love this spot. SMU minus 16.5. We are going to rock with the Mustangs. Now, on the other hand, for Saturday, what's going to be the big Saturday thing? So this, for me, is not going to be a spread, so to speak, but this is going to be an over-under type of situation. And we're looking at that game that we previewed earlier today. We're looking at that 45.5 that's set between Michigan and Penn State. 2 teams that are very good on defense. But here's the thing. I think for Penn State to win this game, I think Penn State needs to score at least 25 to 30 points. I think it's going to be one of those games that's going to happen. It's going to be a really close game. It's going to be a battle. But because I think that's going to be this pretty close game, and because I think Penn State has to score 25 to 30 points to win, and because we picked Penn State to win earlier in the pod, we're going to go with this over here of 45.5. I really like it here. So we're going to lock it in, and we're going to hope for the best in terms of getting us some dubs this upcoming weekend out in the gambling world. So that will lock up our 4 for 4 special. We got Miami that hit, Louisville that didn't, and then we'll see what happens with SMU, as well as what kind of game do we get in that Michigan versus Penn State game. But guys, that is going to go ahead and wrap things up here today. And I hope you did end up going ahead and enjoying this podcast here today. If you did, do me a huge favor, you guys, and go ahead and smack that like button for me. Because if you smack that like button, it lets me know, hey, you enjoy this content. You enjoy this podcast. You also have an opportunity to be an A1 since day one as well. You can hit that subscribe button and be one of the first supporters of the Any Given Saturday College Football Podcast. So all things considered, we're going to come back early next week. We'll give our reactions to the games that happened over the course of the weekend and what surprised me. And depending on what happens, we'll also have that Any Given Saturday power rating reveal as well. See what that top 25 is stacking up like. But with that being said, I am your host, Jake, and I am going to sign off for today. I hope you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.